Perfect. Okay. So as is usual, our materials are posted online. I'll drop them in the chat here if anyone wants a quick link to them. Sec. Okay. And welcome, Anne. Thanks for joining us today. And Billy's here too, I see. All right. So today, what we're going to be doing, you can see in the agenda, and I can share my screen as well. In addition to our sort of housekeeping piece, what we want to do is spend 15 minutes or so looking at a draft agenda for the 18th for the full council. That's next week. And a big piece of that draft agenda is reviewing and approving this guidance document for, that says steering committee. It should say subcommittees. That's a typo on here. Sorry about that. The guidance document for subcommittees. And so that'll be a good chunk of our meeting. And then we have the reconstituted, reconfigured subcommittee membership. And Jane can walk us through what happened there and how the nomination process worked. And your role, as you know, as steering committee is to give a final sign off to that. So we'll just spend a little bit of time doing that. Though we have an hour and a half scheduled on the calendar today, we're going to see if we can do this in an hour. I know we lose Secretary Moore after an hour, so our goal is to do that like that. Before we dive into this agenda, and apologies for that typo right there, any questions, concerns about the agenda before we dive in? Oh, I'm good. Okay. Minutes are linked here. Does anybody need a moment to click through? I'll give folks just a second. Any questions, concerns about the minutes from last meeting? Anybody need a little more time? Graham?
David, just in terms of approval of the minutes, it should be noted that I am abstaining as I was not at that meeting.
Okay. Thanks, Graham. All right. Any concerns, steering committee members? Okay,
good.
great. Let's treat them as approved. Thanks so much. All right, so let's dive into this. And I'll just walk folks through because these materials came so late last Friday, so I apologize. So if you remember our conversation last time, we had hoped to have some updates about sort of key legislative action. And talking with Jane about it afterwards as well, it really felt like the sweet spot for the council is not so much the legislation that's sort of potential and pending right now, but more what's happened in the update on the clean heat standard in particular. Because it is kind of a slippery slope for you all to be having a lot of conversation around legislation that's working its way through the system. Whereas with the clean heat standard, there is this update from the PUC on it. And that was a specific shout out from you all last time. So what we've tried to line up is, as our just transition reflection, you can see, is to get Mia Watson, who is head of that equity advisory group for the clean heat standard, to talk with us about that process. And then we still don't have a name yet on who from the PUC would come and complement what Mia's going to say about the PUC's first check back. And then I was made aware of the fact that there was a sort of environmental coalition of folks, including some folks in the council, like Joey was part of that, and maybe others, I'm not sure who else, and made a response to that check back. And why don't we make a space for that as well, since councilors are part of that. So we thought this would try to get at what you all were saying last time about get an update of key processes. Let me pause before I go to the next thing and say, how's that working? Is that hitting the mark? You'd also talked about maybe getting a pre-read with other things going on. If there's specific things you'd want a pre-read of, let's talk about it right now. Any quick feedback on this part of the agenda and what we're trying to do with the clean heat standard update? Jared?
Thanks, David. Yeah, just on the first part, I just want to share that when I was suggesting in the last meeting that we have an update on things that are happening in the legislature that are relevant to the council or that the council should be aware of, I wasn't suggesting that as a forum for discussion. I think that that's a good point that you and Jane are making, and I agree with it, that it's not really the role of the council to discuss pending legislation, but I do think it is valuable for the council to be aware of what is happening in the legislature that is relevant to and related to some of the recommendations that we have made. So I do think that there's an important distinction there between an update and kind of a advisory or recommendation focused discussion. I don't think that's the place that we're at, but I do think that some updates about where things stand relative to recommendations the council has made could be helpful, just so that there's kind of ongoing awareness.
Okay.
And then on this other piece related to the just transition reflection and the invitations for the 1120 portion of the agenda. I do think that it is really important that there be that we work to make sure that we're hearing from different voices and not have an overly limited understanding of equity. And I have seen that response that a number of organizations provided to the PUC's check back report. I think it takes a much broader view of equity considerations, not just procedural, but also structural and distributional. So I think if we're going to open it up and have a holistic, more balanced conversation, then that could be a positive thing.
So yes to having
I'm okay with it as drafted.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks, Jared. That's helpful. And Jared, if I could just quick on your first point of understanding what's happening, sort of an update, what's going on in the legislature. And I understand it is kind of an interesting moment because it is, what's the word in Vermont where it passes from one to the next and it
crossover.
Yes. So that's happening or happened or so how does a pre-read update work for that? Would that be a good way to do it as opposed to sort of scheduling time on the agenda? And it's more like, hey, this is happening, everyone should know. One of the things we were talking about when I was preparing this with Jane was we should absolutely use our next meeting, our June meeting, to do a real like, hey, this is what happened, right? So I'm just curious how we use this time best versus when we actually have clarity about what went on. We can do that in June. So I'd be interested, and I see Julie, you have your up, so if you want to go ahead and then we can
I just
a little bit.
I share, I guess what you're flagging there, David, as a challenge. There are probably realistically more than a dozen bills that intersect with the Climate Council's work, and frankly don't feel comfortable kind of picking and choosing the ones to highlight as what's likely to move. I think we are at a very messy point in the process. Jared, previously you'd specifically flagged the transportation supplemental bill. There's the S213, but we really at this point don't have a lot of sense for what's going to move and what's not going to move. And just don't want to be, I think we have to be cognizant of not being a filter on that. But at the same time, frankly, I don't have the bandwidth to prepare a comprehensive summary of every piece of legislation introduced that has a nexus with the work of the council.
Okay. Jared, quick thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean,
Or
the
others?
timing,
Yeah.
the timing is tough because the crossover deadline, for, the last policy committee bills is I believe Friday the 15th, and then the council meeting is the 18th. So it's going to be the next business day happening. Maybe one way to do this would be to either have a written update afterwards or in preparation for the next council meeting. I agree with Secretary Moore that it does not make that there are a lot of bills that were introduced that will not move, and it's not worth a lot of extra time and effort to, although at a certain point it's valuable for us to know which of our recommendations did not move and why, as part of kind of a debrief, especially as we go back into revisions for the next cap and know the status of different recommendations. But given the uncertainty of this moment in the process, I can see a written update after, or a deeper dive on this at the next council meeting.
Okay. Okay. Secretary Moore.
I would just add that to the extent we're interested in hearing folks' reflections on why certain things didn't move, it would probably be important to invite legislative leadership, either of the environmental committees or the speaker and pro tem personally. But again, I think it's going to put the administration in a tough spot to comment on different pieces of legislation in a way that's meaningful to the council. So just suggest looking for the right speakers to engage in that dialogue.
So in summary, is it fair to say that it's a tricky moment to do this right now, given that Friday deadline? This is a Monday meeting. It would be very high value in the next meeting to have a fairly in-depth conversation about what moved, what didn't move, and getting the right kind of folks in the room to help us have that conversation. So having some legislative leaders in the room. So maybe we prep that up for June, or our next meeting, I think is June, and we get at what's going to be highest value for the council for that next meeting. Does that sound good? Okay, but we give it a miss this time because it's just too right in the moment. All right. Is that good for everybody else who hasn't chimed in? Is that a fine solution?
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Yeah, I think our next meeting is probably after this session ends, right? And so that will be a time when we will not be trying to grapple with a whole bunch of things, as Secretary Morse and Jared pointed out, some of which will move and some of which won't. I think better to know exactly what legislation has passed and what things didn't. So,
Great.
agreed.
Thanks, Graham. Okay. All right, then let's keep moving forward here. This sounds like this is working, particularly with this sort of diversity of viewpoint as well baked into the agenda. All right, so then we spend, we're going to do a three-step process, or I'm suggesting a three-step process to look over this document that we're going to spend a moment looking at ourselves in just shortly. And the first step is to go through the sort of overall document and its intent. What are we trying to do? Why are we doing this? Is it really addressing the right things, right? Sort of a bigger picture conversation of, are we in the zone with this guidance document for subcommittees? Then we're going to dive into one important piece of it, which is talking about the level of effort and the sort of process steps that are baked into that document. So we'll do that. We will take some public comment, take a break, and then come back and then look at the substantive areas of focus in the doc and spend the final hour doing that. And so I just wrote it out here as a summary here, but it sort of spreads itself over the next kind of items in the agenda is to walk through this guidance document in different ways. So you'll see, and I put the public comment up here in a break. And then just I want to flag that I didn't put public comment at the end of the meeting as well, so we can talk about that, but it felt like it worked well here. Um, that was the whole meeting. That's all I had. And I can't, I don't have notes from you all that if you wanted to do something else in this meeting besides that. So let me pause and say, how's that looking for our meeting? Just doing these two things, essentially getting that update in the clean heat standard, and then spending some real time on this guidance document. How's that looking? Are we missing something that we want to do with the council? Yeah, Julie?
David, do you feel like 25 minutes is enough time, or are those the 11:50 and the 12:15 sort of additive? Like this is a really big thing, I think, to set this direction.
More time?
I don't
Well,
know, or I guess maybe specific feedback from subcommittee chairs could also be helpful. Are they all being invited to this meeting?
That's a great point. Yeah.
So that we can have their engagement. Maybe that's the piece that feels like it's missing right now.
I mean, reading this agenda, it looks to me as though we have from 11:50 until 1:55, right? So we have 2 hours.
Yeah.
Is that right, David? Okay.
Yeah, with some public comment and a break in the middle there, but yes. Yeah, so we invest quite a bit of time in this. The trick is I'm a little, and we'll take a look at it now, in terms of the sort of substantive areas, I'm a little on the fence whether how that's going to work in our sort of Zoom full council world. You know, we made good progress in those smaller groups when we're in person in January. Do we need to do some kind of methodology in this meeting to firm up that guidance? So that's one of the question marks I have in my own sort of like, is this going to work in the full council and Zoom to get the feedback on these substantive areas we want to get? I feel like we'll get good feedback up in here, but I'm a little more concerned here.
Hey, David, this is Jane.
Yeah. Hey, Jane.
Hi. One thing that we've talked about that we haven't talked about having ready for the council meeting, but ready for when subcommittees begin to meet in earnest in April, is the progress report. And I guess I just want to put out there, while it might be a heavy lift for our office to do it this week, that if you were going to dive deep or deeper on the substantive areas, that I really think that's a critical piece to have in front of counselors in order to have that discussion, because that's sort of why I think that we left it at the level that we left it at in the minutes and in the guidance document about the substantive levels, knowing that we still had more work to do to go back to review where we're at and the work that's been made since the cap was passed, using that document that we gave a first round cut at the meeting in January, but there was requests and interest to dive deeper into.
Right. Right. Because we looked at it in January 29th. There was some requests to, you know, update it, change it. And that's what you were talking about, Jane, is that update. Okay. So we could put some time in here to look at that as part of our review of the substantive areas. Okay. Or have it as a resource.
I'm sorry, David, since
Liz.
I'm on, not for what it's worth, I agree with Jane. I think that's the document, Jane, you're talking about, that was the big spreadsheet that some of us gave, notes or feedback on. That was super helpful, and any updates, even if it weren't complete, would be, I think, worthwhile for framing this discussion. In fact, I think without that, the discussion could kind of, wander.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm agreeing with Jane.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Liz. Yeah, that's what I was referring to.
Okay. So we create some specific space in the meeting to look at that document, to sit with it before we really try to do any sort of substantive conversation around guidance. Okay. All right, any other feedback on the agenda? And then let's take a look at that guidance document for a little bit.
You know, I do have one other question. You know, looking back at the minutes of the last couple of steering committee meetings, there were some questions that I had identified a couple meetings ago. Of those, I think there is one which we actually should pay attention to, which is whether we believe we are going to hit the 2025 targets in the law without further rulemaking or not. And I know it's a question on which there are different and strong opinions, and maybe something that we will need to handle sensitively and delicately. But I do think we shouldn't ignore that question. And I also don't, looking at this agenda, don't see any way we could handle so big a topic without adding a whole bunch more hours. So I pose that more as a question than as a suggestion.
Yeah. It's so tricky, Bram, just thinking about the timeline of that, because Secretary Moore can help out with the sort of timeline. If you were to do any rulemaking that would make any difference, you probably would have
It's
had
not
2
possible.
years. Yeah, 2 years ago or something. Right.
Right.
It's
Right.
very challenging, right? And I don't know whether everybody agrees with that assessment. I'm just trying to be realistic about actions that the council takes now that make a difference on that. But Bram and others, like I welcome views.
I mean, I do think that one thing that would be helpful is when we had the last in-person full day climate council meeting, we were able to, you know, at the beginning of the morning, I was able to share some of the questions and concerns that I had about some of the assumptions in the modeling that led to the assumption that we were on track for 2025. And you know, Brian Woods from the Climate Action Office was able to respond to that, to essentially one of the big parts of that was point to updates to the modeling that would be happening to incorporate more recent actual reported data and working to better align with inventory data and methodologies. And I do think that I have not, that's kind of been something that is opaque to me. I don't know where that stands. I don't know what that process is. I don't know when we will have an update, but I feel like that is a very important update to have, because regardless of the specific, you know, timeline on rulemaking, it is I think clearly true that it is the more delay that happens, the harder and harder it becomes to hit our targets, whether they are for 2025 or 2030. So I do think that it is important that we have as accurate and comprehensive of a sense of where things stand, and how that modeling is being updated and improved to correct some of the problems with it before, so that we're getting the best guidance possible, not just for rulemaking that may or may not happen, but for the scale and pace of the recommendations that are going to be needed in this next plan to ensure that we get on track.
Okay. So Jane, your hand is up. I don't know if that's for old or new.
I wanted to make a comment about the progress report and substantive areas, but I'm happy to, we're continuing to update the modeling. I'm not sure if it's the right thing for this meeting, just knowing what we're trying to do. Obviously we can present on the modeling when the steering committee and the council want us to, but that wasn't what I was going to comment on. So
okay. So I just want to circle back and make sure, Bram, we address what you're saying. What I'm hearing is that a cycle of rulemaking that would have an impact on 2025 doesn't seem to make sense. That doesn't mean you take your foot off the gas in solving issues that Jared's bringing up about having modeling and data in the right place, or all the work the council's going to do identifying priorities. I'm struggling to see how or why the council would do something different than its plan because of 2025. That's what I'm struggling. I'm just curious, Bram, how in this conversation, how you're seeing that.
It may well be that, the beginning of 2025 being only 9 months away and the end of it being only 21 months away, that there is not a great deal we can do to affect Vermont's emissions over that time period that we're not already doing. I think updated modeling and data, I think, is probably absolutely the first step so that we can sort of all see where we are relative to the statutory goals. And, if we're going to miss them, how big the miss is, and then that will dictate our next actions. And it is probably, our next mile post is at 2030. So, it may well be that the actions now are to determine whether or not we're going to hit 2025, and if we miss, how big is the miss, and then we take corrective action for 2030.
Yeah. Okay. So given that, are there any changes folks would like to see to Monday's agenda based on sort of how we're landing on this?
Hi, I just wanted to jump in. This is Kelly. I apologize for being late.
Oh, hey, Kelly. Kelly, have you been listening to this? Anything you want to say about the agenda, or is it looking okay for Monday?
I need to pull that one up since I'm on my phone.
Yeah.
So give me a sec.
No worries. No worries. So, while Kelly's doing that, anything else we want to say about the agenda before I really want to give you all a moment to take a look at this guidance document before we send it to the full council. And I'll just give folks a moment to read it. But before I do that, any last things on this agenda? Okay. I'm going to stop sharing it. Actually, what I'll do is, so let's take a look at this. And it came to you Friday evening, so it's just not fair to assume that you've been had a chance to read it. I'd recommend, if folks just want to take a moment, I'm happy to sit in silence just for a moment. If folks want to take a second to read through this, here's the direct link. If you want to do it on your own screen. I'm just gonna, if folks are okay, I'm just gonna sit here for a second and let you read through this. I'll give you a moment. Does anybody not have the ability to pull it up on the screen? Thanks, Jared, for the thing. All right, let's just sit and read this thing for a moment. I'll scroll it on my screen for anybody who can't use their own link. Okay. Anybody need another minute to finish up? I'm happy to give another minute, just checking.
Nope, I'm all set.
Thanks.
Liz.
Too.
Okay. Thanks everyone for the typo help. That's great. In addition, sorry for the scroll on the screen here. Hey, Kelly.
Hi, I
Yeah,
apologize. Before we jump into this, I did just get a chance to look over the agenda and I had one slight concern for the just transitions moment. One of
yeah.
the things I've been asking for a long time is that we have members of affected communities rather than having presentations from, policymakers and all of that.
Mhm.
And I did get a chance to read the document, the Clean Heat Standard thing, and I'm not sure. I'm just a little bit concerned about this being the choice for what the presentation is. I know a lot of thought and effort went into that, but I also think the Clean Heat Standard has had a lot of controversy where I'm a little bit concerned about that being the just transitions reflection. I would love if we could maybe revisit that and maybe have that presentation another time, or have a conversation about that with other people who aren't just me. Maybe other folks from the impacted communities that are being, that would be helped by delaying or not helped by delaying the Clean Heat Standard due to these considerations. Does that make sense? I'm
Right.
sorry if it's not very clear.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, one thing that just thinking aloud, and it's you know, we could invite Mia to be part of that next part of the agenda, right? Where it's the PUC talking about their first get back on the Clean Heat Center. Mia's part of that conversation. So on the PUC and Mia's there, right? Hang on, let me pull it up real quick. Sorry about that. And so, and if you had an idea, Kelly, of who could be, someone who you've been thinking about, or the Just Transitions subcommittee has been thinking about, and we could have that person there. It could be not about the Clean Heat Standard, right? It could be about something else.
Yeah.
And then we talk about the Clean Heat Standard, and we have some of the PUC. We have Mia Watson there, right? And then we have someone who was part of that response letter there. So it's kind of, it's all in the 1120 piece.
I'd feel more comfortable with that. I think that would be more appropriate, and I can work to identify somebody who would be able to speak from, their personal experience as a member of an impacted community. And I know we have sort of a short list of folks that we've been considering. So if that would be okay, I could circle back to you and Jane with some thoughts and, try to do the outreach to get somebody who'd be willing. I would think we did this at the very beginning, and it was just so powerful to hear directly from people. And not that we should never have reports from policymakers or department heads or anything like that as part of this, because I think some of those have also been really powerful. I just didn't want it to be the norm going forward. I think, I think that makes a lot more sense to have that have her fit into the next part. And if you think we need to adjust the times, I didn't look at like time, lengths of time or whatever, to accommodate that would also make sense.
Okay. Other members of the
Thanks.
steering committee? Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And other members of the steering committee, how does that sound? To do, instead of doing what we have on the page here, Mia Watson would be part of this overall conversation about the Clean Heat Standard, and we'd have something totally different up at the top here. I see Secretary Moore says thumbs up. Jared says thumbs up. Other things, friendly amendment, Bram? Yeah, okay.
No, that's perfect feedback.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. So everybody seems right on board with that, Kelly. So why don't, Kelly, you and I and Jane
Yeah,
figure
thanks so
out.
much.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought it up. Why why don't the three of us figure out what's going to happen there, that piece, and then let's make sure we have some real clear expectations with the person we invite, so they know what they're
Yeah.
getting into and not getting into.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
sounds great.
Okay, super. Thanks for that. That was helpful.
Thank you.
Okay. Now back to the doc. So let me suggest the following. My goal in this conversation with you all is to feel like this is good enough to send to the council so that we can have a deeper conversation about it next week. And if you would like more time as steering committee members to think about it and provide some written feedback, I would say, let's just weave all that detailed input into the council discussion next week. What I'd love to do now in the next 5-10 minutes is to say, what needs to change in here right now so that this is good enough to spark the conversation we're trying to spark with the council.
David, who put this together?
Say again?
Who put this together?
I wrote it. And I wrote it on the basis of conversations we've had here in this space. And then the piece on the bottom on the substantive is what was shown, what came out of January 29th, and the synthesis of that was in a PowerPoint that I showed, I think, to you all last time in our last meeting.
I asked that just so that I would know whom to thank. So thank you
Okay.
putting this together.
Yeah.
You know, and I believe it is true that we at this point have decided that biomass is a full council issue and not a subcommittee issue. Is that accurate?
I think the council can ask groups to work on it if there's further things to work on. I think you just need to have clear instruction what the thing is that you want a group to work on.
Well, we have research going on, a study, and so I think our next step is for that study to come back. I guess more explicitly, that study comes back and gets presented to the whole council rather than to going through a subcommittee. As I recall, our earlier discussions on how we wanted to manage this, just wanted to make sure that was accurate.
Yeah. Thanks, Graham. Yeah. I want to do a quick, just make sure there is not a study underway right now. I just want to make sure that everyone knows that. And so, but yeah, with biomass, it is right now, it is sitting with the council. And Bram, on that point, is there anything you'd want to make sure gets included in a version of this that goes out to the council this week, whether it's on buyback or something else?
Other than the little things that we pointed out in the chat, I think it's great.
Excellent. Thanks, Bram. That's helpful. Additional feedback, things you'd want to see before this goes out to the council, Secretary Moore?
Yeah, I'm just, maybe I'm reading it too quickly. But this is the climate plan before 2030, right? Where we're going to have the ability to appreciably affect the outcome. The next update to the climate plan would be due in July of 29, which is not dissimilar to the conversation we've had about our ability to do any kind of rulemaking that ultimately affects the trajectory right now for 25, a similar distance from now. And I'm just worried that nowhere in here is it talking about how we're going to put all of this information together to develop a set of recommendations sufficient to meet 2030, right? Particularly, I guess, cross-sector speaks only to transportation, and we know that there are significant gaps in other spaces. And I think there's a real role for the science and data subcommittee, which isn't articulated in the way in the bullets ascribed to their work on page 2.
Yep. Yep. So if I were to make adjustments, or we would make adjustments to this doc before it goes out to the council, I hear two things there. One is we need to be saying, particularly in the cross-sector piece, but probably even at a higher level of this plan, it will be crucial in helping the state meet, in particular, its 2030 targets, right? And we need to have a plan that is coherent with those targets or some other solution there. And so that's one. And number two is you think that science and data could do more. Could you give me a little help there in what you'd like to see in the science and data?
Well, I guess I'm sort of expecting, I know Jane indicated we're doing it updated to the business as usual case right now and digging into some of those details. That seems like work that would ultimately come to the science and data subcommittee for review and comment and input. Because to me, that sort of serves as the base for jumping off for the second half of what I flagged there.
Right. Okay. Nice. That's really helpful. Thanks. Other key things that need to get in here before we send it off to the council and have a big conversation about it?
I just want to second what Secretary Moore said. I think it'd be really valuable to make explicit in the work for the subcommittees that the recommendations they come forward with add up to a revised plan that does hit 2030 and 2050's goals.
Nice. Okay.
The only other thing I'd flag, David, is the resilience implementation strategy, and I think that the governor and the treasurer jointly announced and is now being sort of incorporated into some other pieces in the legislature potentially. I think probably acknowledging that under rural resilience and adaptation, it's sort of quantitative goals and metrics to track progress in that it's really meant to be an implementation plan. But I think, and it's going to be on a timeline similar or identical to the climate action plan. But I think thinking up front about work being done there and how to be additive and not duplicative is going to be important.
Okay. Nice. Okay. That's great. So I have three on my notes. I've got three things you put in the chat on typos and stuff that needs some help. I have a specific mention of making sure we are referencing the 2030 target and 2050, but in particular 2030, because this is the one plan that really is going to set us on a track or not. And that's going to require us to do a little bit more in the science and data bullets, in the cross-sector bullets and in the science and data bullets, make specific mention of that in the review of business as usual as a launching pad to have good conversations about this. And then finally, mentioning the resilience implementation strategies underway, parallel process, how to be complementary, additive, not duplicative. Anything else we want to do in this doc before it gets circulated to the council?
I have a question, and it's probably mostly for David and Kelly, perhaps Jane. And it relates to public engagement and how it shows up in this document. And perhaps this is just on me for not being as familiar with the kind of full vision and plan for public engagement, but kind of right now where I see it showing up is a note that there will be kind of report backs from the public engagement team about what is being heard. And I just want to offer a reflection that, while there were challenges with public engagement for all sorts of reasons in the first climate action plan, not the least of which was contending with the pandemic, one of the things that I thought worked really well is that for those webinars and all of those in-person meetings that were had at state and public parks across the state, the full council and the subcommittees were invited to attend, and counselors and subcommittees were hearing directly from and could answer questions that people had about the emerging recommendations and about the council. And it seems to me right now, correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of the public engagement work is kind of happening through different processes to reach different groups of folks, and it's by a targeted public engagement team. And that may be appropriate for what's happening right now, but I do think that as we get closer to recommendations and updated recommendations, new recommendations, a revised plan, that it will be important to have opportunities for counselors and subcommittee members to hear directly from members of the public, and to have those public engagement events have the benefit of having clarifying questions responded to by the people who are developing the recommendations. And it's just not, that may be planned, it's just not clear to me from this document if and how that may fit in. And I feel like that would be a missing piece if we lose it entirely.
Thanks, Jared. I'm glad you brought that up. In the very short answer, and Jane and Kelly, I welcome you to chime in, but absolutely we can put that in this document, that there should and will be opportunities for counselors and subcommittee members to participate directly in public engagement activities. I think we can put in this document, and it is part of the vision of the public engagement. There's a balance where there are focus groups and things like that happening, right?
Yeah.
In gatherings where it's not great to have a whole bunch of people show up, right? So
Makes
there's a
sense.
balance of having the kinds of activities where it's wonderful to have that kind of direct engagement, and other activities where it doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So anything else on that doc? I just dropped the screen so we can see each other a little bit better.
I was
And
just going to add a quick.
Go ahead, Kelly. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Just from that thing, Jared said something about, having members of the public come speak to the council. I think that in those meetings that it's not appropriate to have a bunch of counselors chiming in or sitting in. If there's anybody who is very articulate and able to share a really powerful story and willing to come afterwards to speak to the council, that would be a great place to find those folks that I was talking about to, speak from their experience for our Just Transitions moment.
That's a nice idea. I like that. Okay. All right. So what I'll do is I'll take this feedback, make a new version of this. We'll give it out to the council with plenty of lead time for Monday. So Jane and I can work to get this out tomorrow or something like that, so people have time to read the doc, and then we can have a good conversation on Monday. And I'd welcome all of you to chime in with more input as well. Like, this wasn't your one bite. Like, I really want this conversation to be good on Monday. So I welcome all of you to dive in further on that. Okay. But just to be super clear, you all with those changes are happy with this going out to the full council? We're okay with that? Okay. Thanks, everyone. All right, so the last thing we wanted to do before we do a little moment of public comment was to look at the nominations piece. And looks like you're back in the office, Jane. That's great. So you can help walk people through, so just if you want to give a flavor of how this went with the nominations. There's a link in the document. I can share my screen. I'll just drop it in the chat too. Why don't I won't share my screen right now so we can see each other, but Jane, can you give us the sort of, 1 to 2 minute version of how the nomination process went and what happened? And there seems to be, I'm looking at my document, there seems to be a little problem with the PDF.
I can share my screen in 1 second, because we actually, as of Friday when this went out, cross-sector mitigation hadn't put forward their nominations, but I got them last night. So I will share with you the full list of nominations for you to approve in a minute, and just remind you of the process real quick, which was as directed in the guidance document for the council that you all approved and the council vetted once every 3 years, aligned with as nominations come in from the legislature. The Climate Action Office will support a broader public process to put forward new subcommittee members. The idea being that up until now, there hadn't been a set term date and or a place to speak to how the process would unfold and the support given by the Climate Action Office for that. So we did that. We casted a wide net. We had a public forum. We put it out to as many places as we could. And folks both self-nominated themselves as well as recommended other nominations for the different subcommittees. In an effort to be clear about how decisions were being made about new nominees, subcommittee co-chairs were asked to provide guidance on where there were gaps in expertise or knowledge that they wanted on the subcommittees. So it wasn't just open-ended, but specific needs that subcommittees had. And I understand and expect that that is how co-chairs made decisions about the nominations that you now see, excuse me, in front of you. And I believe, and Kelly, you can speak to this, that besides just transitions, that all subcommittees worked through their co-chairs because of the hard timeline to actually put forward nominations. There wasn't a process that went to full subcommittees, except for just transitions, which used a smaller subset of the subcommittee to vet candidates and make phone calls for the nominations that they put forward. So today we have all the nominations for 4 of the 5 subcommittees. Jared, I don't have nominations for science and data, and maybe you can speak to that too and after I finish today. And the only outstanding issue for us to deal with is youth nominees. Not all subcommittees, well, you should remember that one of the lasting legacies of IRIS was the idea of having not just one youth nominee, but a network of youth nominees to support each other and learn through the process. That's supported also behind the scenes by VEEP. And that process, some subcommittees have youth nominees and some don't right now. And VEEP actually asked for a little bit more time to work through their networks to get youth members up and running for nominations. And so that process closes on March 16th, and we'll have some additional youth nominations later in the month or the next time you all meet. There is a meeting on the schedule, I believe, for you all on March 25th. I'm not sure if we're keeping that or not. And so the only thing outstanding is some additional youth nominees, and then Jerry can speak to science and data. So I will share my screen. Well, maybe I'll pause there and just see Kelly and or Jared if you want to add anything in particular, since you're co-chairs, about processes that you put in place and or where things stand with science and data, Jerry.
I think you covered that summed it up pretty well, Jane. Thanks.
Great, Kelly.
Yeah, and I'll just say from our side, we had a little bit of a challenge in that at least one, perhaps more of our nominees were also nominated for other subcommittees. And so we were trying to go through a process of identifying whether there was an interest to serve in multiple or preference between subcommittees. So I think that seeing these final lists from the other subcommittees actually gives some additional clarity. And hopefully we will be able to move forward with a recommendation, within the next week or two. So we don't have a final one yet, but we should shortly. And just in terms of context, we had kind of one opening on the subcommittee. So it's not like we're sorting through a very long list or planning to recommend a large number of new members.
Great. So as Sophie heard from subcommittee members, she put this forward in a list. Obviously from here, we'll put this into the chart that we often update to keep the subcommittee membership updated and relevant on the website for folks to reference. But I think you all know that the subcommittee with the largest turnover and need for sort of bolstering was Ag and Eco. And there was a lot of interest in trying to have expertise that was broadening the tent for ecologists and foresters, because we don't actually have that expertise really even on the council right now, because the farm and forest seat, not that Jael doesn't have forestry or ecology expertise, but she really is a farmer and brings that perspective primarily. So there was a lot of interest in trying to broaden it with ecologists, foresters, as well as, I believe, rounding out some additional agricultural perspectives. And so they have the largest suite of nominations coming forward, but feel like they are going to be well staffed and well positioned to do the work based on these 6 additional nominees. Cross sector, as I said, came in last night. There was an interest in broadening the perspective of that subcommittee to have voices of low-income Vermonters represented, understanding how the implementation of equitable policy will work, frontline. And Eric Schultz is actually an energy coach with Capstone, and that recommendation was put forward by Sue Minter, and Eric has agreed to serve on cross-sector. So again, cross-sector was pretty well staffed, like science and data, so they weren't looking for a lot of additional nominations, but just that additional voice and perspective. Just transitions, I'll pause and come back to that, Kelly, if you want to vet, just since that subcommittee is going to be quite large again. And I know that there's been interest and understanding of why that makes sense for that subcommittee, but Kelly, happy to have you speak to that. And then finally, David Dean has agreed to step in to serve as co-chair with Andrea Wright on rural resilience and adaptation. And then that is actually quite a large subcommittee right now as well, with additional counselors, Allie and Paula Melton. And so there's just two nominations to broaden both municipal and RPC rep again for that subcommittee. And I think that's it. Those are the nominations, assuming in all honesty, because it really was a co-chair led process on selection. If there are specific questions, I would encourage you to reach out to co-chairs, and I really valued the suggestion that co-chairs be invited to next week's council meeting, and we'll be sure to follow up directly with an invitation to them so that as questions arise too, they're the best ones to answer that. So Kelly, I'll just leave just transitions on the screen if you want to say anything about additional reps, and then go from there.
Sure. Yes. Especially yes, if there are questions about why the subcommittee was as large as it is, and that was something that we discussed at the when we first set up the subcommittee, was that it made sense for it to be larger because we wanted to as diverse as much diversity as possible. And for a while, it sort of felt like we haven't, like our diversity circle has been narrowing, and we wanted to widen it up again. And every single one of these nominees adds something that we don't have a lot of overlap. We obviously have some, we live in Vermont, but we have, every single person could bring something new and help with balancing out our ability to have conversations about people in all different walks of life and different backgrounds and experiences. Also, since the hope is that a lot of our work can be more acting as liaisons with the other subcommittees, it's helpful to have a larger group because not everyone will necessarily be able to do that, but we can spread out the work better that way too. That's really the effort now, and it's not like with cross sector who's working on details of action plans and things. So does that explain it for anybody? Anyone have some great questions?
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, there's some fun background noise there too, but I think everybody heard. Any questions for Kelly? No, we're looking good. That was a great, helpful explanation. Okay, so steering committee members, any questions, concerns about what you're seeing from Jane? Jane, that doc is not, that's a version of the doc that's not on the meeting materials just yet. So you'll upload that to the meeting materials?
I think it is online, except Eric Schultz was not on it. So, but I'll update it with Eric's name on it.
Okay.
I think.
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. Sorry. Any questions, concerns? You all as steering committee member, steering committee need to say thumbs up to these nominations, at least the ones that we have. Any concerns about saying yes to this group of new people coming on? No concerns? Everybody good? Okay.
No concerns.
Thanks, Liz. All right. So let's say yes to that. Thanks, Jane, for dealing with that process. The only other thing we wanted to do today was, if anybody's joining us, public comment kind of thing. If you're not a member of the steering committee and there's something you want to say about what we've been talking about, now's a great time. I just see 2 folks on. But I'd welcome if anybody has anything to say, to chime in. Now's a good time. Okay. All right. Okay, so we have notes on how to update that agenda for Monday. Kelly, let's work, you, Jane, and me on identifying and prepping up somebody for the Just Transitions moment. And then we have the other pieces of notes around that. We have notes on how to do a quick turnaround on that guidance document and get that out as well. We have our nominations approved. We just, Gerald will get the name for science and data. Next time we'll do that. And then we have the youth reps as well. We have one little thing, which is Jane flagged at it, which is on our calendars is a steering committee meeting 2 weeks from now. And we could keep it. We could ditch it. It could be valuable in sort of launching us into the next couple months of work. We don't need it's for 90 minutes. We definitely don't need 90 minutes worth of work 2 weeks from now. But if we kept it on the books, we could maybe use a half hour's worth of work to make sure we're launching ourselves into the next few months well. What do folks think?
My sense is that it could be valuable to keep it and shorten it for 2 reasons. One would be to do a debrief of the council meeting that will have happened not long before and get initial kind of thoughts on the page for items for the June agenda. I don't think we need like a formal draft agenda by then. We'll have more time to do that, but we could at least debrief the last meeting and say, in light of that, here are some things that we want to share as ideas as we look ahead to the June agenda. The other reason, and apologies that this may be of narrower interest to me as a science and data subcommittee co-chair, is that the next science and data subcommittee meeting is March 29th. So if we are able to have a meeting on the 25th to approve the nomination that comes forward, we can have a full subcommittee at our next subcommittee meeting. If that steering committee meeting would be the 25th and science and data is on the 29th.
Great. Everybody feel good about that?
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
All right. We'll definitely tighten up to less than 90 minutes. We'll see if it's a half hour kind of thing, why don't we leave it as an hour in the books and then tighten it up in real time. Okay. Anything else before we finish up? Nice. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for the good meeting today. We will see you. Have a good week. Happy Monday. And we'll see you a week from now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
David.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.